May the 26th, 1817, there was a dance at Tyburn House near Castle Bromwich. A dance in a country house just after the Napoleonic Wars. How delightful! What a picture from Jane Austen! How elegant! Well, not quite. The dance took place in the part of Tyburn House that was the 3 Tuns Inn. The revellers were not the fashionable young gentlemen and ladies created by our finest novelist. They were stout young farm-hands and wispy housemaids. Their conversation was not witty flirtation controlled by perfect manners. It was coarse innuendo, or downright farmyard boorishness. Consider the remarks passed by bricklayer Abraham Thornton when Mary Ashford came into the assembly. "Who's that, and what's she called?" he asked. He was told that she was old Ashford's daughter. His response was unhesitating. "I have been connected with her sister," he told his companions, "and I will with her, or I'll die by it." So, at least, a court was later informed. But the 19th century tended to clean things up a bit before bringing them to the maidenly ears of magistrates and judges. Do you think Thornton used the words "connected with"? I don't. Try them out in the bucolic contexts he knew best. "Put the ram down the meadow and see if he'll be connected with the ewes." Or, "I took the cow out to have connection with the old bull this morning." Or, "When us was little, us used to like watching the boar having connection with the sow." It doesn't work somehow, does it? I won't fill in the rustic indelicacies he probably used. "I've had her sister and I'll have her too," seems strong enough for this time of night. Now, ladies, I'm sure that's not at all the sort of thing you would find complimentary as a covert greeting, even if it represented a positive response to an alluring appearance which had taken up a good deal of your time and energy. But Mary was not choosy. The priapic admiration of an Abraham Thornton was perfectly acceptable. She ultimately left the dance with him. Mary had, in fact, taken a good deal of care to be well turned out for the occasion. She'd gone in the morning to fetch her friend Hannah Cox, another housemaid, from her workplace. The two had walked together to Hannah's mother's house at Erdington, where Mary left a bundle containing her clean white ball gown, white stockings, and white spencer, a cross between a cardigan and a bolero. Then, in her day clothes, a pink cotton gown, scarlet spencer, straw bonnet, and black stockings, she went to Birmingham Market for the day, returning at about 6 to change at Hannah's mother's and go with Hannah to the dance. The two girls danced until nearly midnight, when Hannah felt it was time to go home. Mary was not yet ready to leave, but agreed to join Hannah in a little while on a bridge about 30 yards from the 3 Tuns. Hannah went out to the bridge with a young farmer called Benjamin Carter, and about 15 minutes later Mary came and joined them, accompanied by Abraham Thornton. The two couples strolled on together toward Erdington and a house curiously named the Old Cuckoo, where Hannah took the Erdington road, and Carter went another way to his home. Mary and Abraham stayed talking for a long time. A very long time. John Umpage, who'd been visiting Mr. Reynolds near Penn's Mills, close to the stile into Bell Lane, which led to Erdington, heard voices outside at 2 a.m. At 2:45, he left Mr. Reynolds to go home, and, passing the stile, he saw Mary and Abraham still talking quietly and amiably. He noticed that Mary ducked her head down, as though she didn't want to be recognized. It was around 4 in the morning when Mary came to Hannah's house, in high good humour to change back into her day clothes. She carried her ball finery away in a bundle, and, perhaps significantly, the gown was later found to have some bloodstains on it. Mary had, in fact, started her period that night, but also she had been a virgin prior to that night. I said it was around 4 when Mary, alive and well, changed her clothes and left Hannah's house to return home. We cannot be really precise about these times. By Hannah's own account, her mother's clock said 20 to 5, but it was 41 minutes fast. Between 4:30 and 5, several people saw Abraham Thornton making his way back to Castle Bromwich, where he lived. He was walking unremarkably and unhastily along the road from Erdington, and he would seem to have arrived at Castle Bromwich around 5 o'clock. At 6:30, A labourer named Jackson was walking through the land on the other side of the stile where Thornton and Mary had been chatting at 2 in the morning. There was a pit full of water a few yards from the stile. About a foot away from the steep slope leading down to the pit, Jackson found a bundle and a bonnet and a pair of shoes. And on picking them up, he found that one of the shoes was covered with blood. He hurried away to seek help. About 30 yards off from the pit, he noticed a zigzag of blood spots. A little further still, there was a substantial pool of blood beside a bush. Jackson made for the nearest working man's cottage, from which he aroused William Lavelle and told him what he had found. The 2 men hurried back to the pit. Shortly before the pool of blood, Lavelle spotted running footprints, first a man's large shoes, then a woman's smaller feet. A little before the pool of blood, the track started dodging about, backwards and forwards. After the pool of blood, the trail ran on toward the water-filled pit, and from the water pit, the man's footprints alone emerged, running across the field to a corner that led to the Castle Bromwich road. Inside the water-filled pit, the 2 men found the body of Mary Ashford. Mr. Webster, the owner of Penn's Mills, arrived on the scene, and gave orders that the body was to be taken to Lavelle's cottage. Joseph Bird, one of the mill hands, became Lavelle's detective assistant. He noticed that the pool of blood lay within the impression of a woman's body, laid out on its back, the arms and legs spread-eagled. He also observed the marks of a pair of man's shoes at the foot end of the body impression. Lavelle and Bird then drew Mr. Webster's attention to the running footprints. Mr. Webster sent for the blood-stained pair of women's shoes and tried them in the footprints. They fitted exactly. Lavelle carefully covered over examples of the male and female footprints with boards to protect them against both rain and the trampling of onlookers. The story of the trail suggested that Mary had been chased, raped, chased again, and then drowned in the pit by her rapist. The story of the drowned girl spread fast through the district, till it reached Mr. Clark, the landlord at Tyburn House who had organized the fatal ball. He immediately went to look for Abraham Thornton, and finding him on the turnpike road, said, "What is become of the young woman that went away with you from my house last night?" Thornton said nothing. "She is murdered," Mr. Clark continued, "and thrown into a pit." "Murdered?" expostulated Thornton. "Yes, murdered," said Mr. Clark. "I was with her till 4 o'clock this morning," gasped Thornton. "You must go along with me and clear yourself," was Mr. Clark's admonition. "I can soon do that," Thornton replied. And certainly his reaction to hearing of Mary's death sounds exactly like that of an innocent man, as does the fact that he went unhesitatingly with Mr. Clark back to the scene of the crimes. But there disaster overtook him. His shoes were compared with the footprints Lavelle had covered with the board, and the fit was exact. Not only did the size and shape match, there was the mark of a sparrowbill nail at the right point. Abraham Thornton was rapidly arrested. A doctor examined Mary's body in Lavelle's cottage and declared death was by drowning, and he reported that there were 2 types of blood over her thighs. Abraham Thornton was charged with Mary Ashford's murder. He was extremely fortunate in his counsel. Mr. Reader could neither put his client in the box nor make a speech on his behalf, but he could, by cross-examination, draw out weaknesses in the prosecution case, and very skilfully he did so. He brought out that the board-covered footprints lay in the track prior to the scene of the possible rape, so that there was no certain evidence that the same man had pursued Mary after the loss of her maidenhead as had been following her previously. One untested footprint at the water's edge might have been Mary's, suggesting that she tripped and drowned herself accidentally. He brought out that Mary had been cheerful and unperturbed when changing her ball gown at Hannah's at 4 in the morning, and that there was blood staining on the ball gown. So, if the doctor was right in thinking that the act of sexual intercourse had started her menstruation, it had certainly not been a rape, and there was no occasion for her murder by the man who enjoyed her favours. he brought out the times at which Thornton had been seen passing from Erdington Castle to Castle Bromwich, times which seemed quite incompatible with his having murdered Mary after she'd changed. Thornton was acquitted on the reasonable doubt. Well, with those damning footprints, you may imagine there was an uproar. Mary's family were understandably especially aggrieved that the man they thought had raped and murdered their innocent lass should go scot-free. Her brother William took legal advice, and learned that there was an old statute of Henry VII declaring that a person acquitted of murder might not be freed if another private person brought a private prosecution against them within a year and a day. William did just this. And when Thornton had been rearrested and brought to trial for the second time, Mr. Reader proved himself a lawyer of genius. Ashford had found an old statute of Henry VII, had he? Mr. Reader studied it carefully, and invoked the second half of it, which Ashford had ignored. When the clerk of the court, having heard Ashford's formal plea, turned to Thornton and said, "Abraham Thornton, are you guilty or not guilty of the said felony and murder?" Thornton took a slip of paper from one pocket and a pair of huge gauntleted gloves from the other. Then, deliberately hurling the right glove into the well of the court, he read carefully yet confidently from the paper, "Not guilty, and I am ready to defend the same with my body." Consternation. Mr. Reader had realized that this statute allowed trial by combat, and since the part Ashford invoked was unrepealed, so too was the medieval principle to which Thornton now appealed. If the combat went forward, both men would be armed with heavy staves, taken to a 60-foot square of rough ground, and made to bang away at each other until one was killed, or Thornton yielded, in which case he would be taken from the spot and hanged immediately, or the sun set without either conclusion, in which case Thornton would be declared not guilty. Ashford was a slight, clerkly man. Thornton was a robust bricklayer in his middle 20s. Nobody doubted that he could and would beat Ashford to death if the combat occurred. But in the age of Jane Austen that was unlikely. Mr. Reader explained his appeal to the uncivilized and archaic statute, on the ground that such prejudice existed against Thornton that he could not expect a fair jury trial, and that the statute allowing private prosecutors to have a second bite at the cherry was itself archaic anyway. Vainly Ashford protested that he had new evidence which must go before a jury. He had one of those dodgy statements from an old lag to the effect that Thornton had confessed to him in prison. Even the old lag withdrew that one before he could be accused of perjury. He had Thornton's shirt, which for some reason had not been brought up at the first trial. A shirt with bloodstains. Yes, of course, riposted Mr. Reader. Thornton did not deny having connection with Mary, just as he'd always hoped. It was with her full consent, and he had nothing to do with the waylaying and murdering which had succeeded her going to change her clothes after the happy, innovative experience. Defeated, William Ashford withdrew his charge rather than face bludgeoning to death. But all did not fare smoothly for Abraham Thornton. The populace of Warwickshire believed, as I do, that he had, in fact, raped and murdered Mary. He was so detested locally that he left England for America, where he passed into obscurity.